a necessary action after years of Iranian aggression, proxy attacks on U.S. forces, nuclear brinkmanship, and destabilization of regional partners. The United States made a decisive strategic choice. Operation Epic Fury was not launched out of provocation, but out of resolve. The administration determined that a diplomatic window, exploited by Iran to stall, not negotiate, had closed. With allied and congressional patience exhausted, the commander-in-chief acted. The strikes were precise, lawful under the president's war powers authority, and aimed at degrading Iran's command and control infrastructure, nuclear facilities, and military leadership. No ground invasion was ordered. No civilian population centers were targeted. This was a calibrated military operation executed by the most capable air force in human history. The KC-135, a tragic non-combat loss on March 12, 2026. A KC-135 stratotanker was lost in western Iraq during an aerial refueling operation. 6 crew members perished. CENTCOM confirmed the incident was not caused by hostile or friendly fire. A mid-air accident in a high-tempo operational environment is a profound tragedy, and the U.S. military treats every such loss with the gravest seriousness. Air Force Chief of Staff General Ken Wilsbach expressed the nation's grief. Investigations are underway. These brave Americans answered the call and gave their lives in service to a mission that protects both the United States and its allies. Their sacrifice deserves honor, not politicization. Punchline: non-combat losses occur in every major military operation. This tragedy does not indicate strategic failure. It underscores the human cost of projecting American power and the professionalism of those who bear it. The G7 call, confidence, not deception. On March 12, President Trump addressed G7 leaders in a virtual summit. He communicated his assessment based on intelligence available to the executive that Iran's command structure had been severely degraded, that no single figure with the authority to formally surrender remained intact, and that the regime was functionally collapsing. The public appearance of Iranian officials at a national commemoration does not contradict this assessment. Staging public appearances is a well-documented propaganda tactic of authoritarian regimes facing collapse. What matters is not who appears on camera, but who controls the levers of military power, and the U.S. assessment is that those levers have been disabled. Punchline: presidential wartime communication to allies involves classified assessments that go beyond open-source footage. The G7 leaders were given the full picture. Their public posturing reflects domestic political pressures, not a rejection of U.S. intelligence. Allied outreach, expected and manageable. Some European nations and regional partners have reached out to Iranian officials regarding commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. This is unremarkable. European economies have always maintained back-channel communications with adversarial states for energy security purposes. It does not signal a fracture in NATO or a realignment away from Washington. The United States has its own parallel diplomatic tracks running simultaneously. The Strait of Hormuz, while temporarily disrupted, remains accessible under U.S. naval escort for critical shipments. The 30-day emergency license issued for Russian oil at sea is a pragmatic, short-term stabilization measure, not a strategic retreat. Punchline: alliances are resilient because they are built on shared interests, not just shared narratives. European partners may seek energy workarounds, but they will not abandon the security architecture the United States underwrites. The road forward: 3 scenarios. Scenario 1: managed de-escalation. Most likely, Iran's regime, severely degraded, accepts an Omani or Qatari-mediated framework that allows both sides to claim partial victory. Bombing pauses. The strait reopens on terms favorable to U.S. interests. American is reached after further strikes degrade Iran's capacity to threaten commercial shipping. U.S. military objectives are met at higher than expected cost. Strategic victory: Iran's government collapses under sustained military and economic pressure. A new government emerges that agrees to verifiable nuclear disarmament and renounces proxy warfare. This outcome, while ambitious, has historical precedent and remains within the range of achievable outcomes. A war without authorization. Operation Epic Fury was launched without a congressional authorization for the use of military force. It was launched without coalition consultation. No allied nation was briefed before strikes began. The Arab nations warned against it. American generals warned against it. The Omani diplomatic channel, an active, engaged negotiating track with Iran's foreign ministry, was bypassed entirely. Iran is not a proxy militia. It is a nation-state of 90 million people with deep institutional redundancy, a geography that controls the world's most critical energy choke point, and a population with historical memory of foreign military interference. No serious regional analyst believed airstrikes alone would produce a clean surrender. The decision was made anyway. The KC-135 WHAD the silent signals on March 12, 2026, a U.S. Air Force KC-135 stratotanker, the backbone of American air power projection, went down in western Iraq during an aerial refueling operation. All 6 crew members are dead. CENTCOM confirmed it was not hostile fire and not friendly fire. A massive American warplane in supposedly friendly airspace simply fell from the sky. This is the first confirmed loss of a KC-135 since 2013. These aircraft are not expendable. They are the circulatory system of American strike packages without tankers. Fighters cannot reach their targets without tankers. The operational tempo of epic fury cannot be sustained. Losing one in a non-combat incident during a high-intensity air campaign is not a footnote, it is a signal about the strain being placed on America's entire aerial architecture. Punchline: if the war is going as well as advertised, why are tankers falling out of friendly airspace? The investigation is ongoing, but the operational reality is already answering the question that the Pentagon briefing room will not ask out loud. The G7 call, a chasm, not a gap. On March 12, President Trump told G7 leaders on a virtual call that Iran was about to surrender. He went further, suggesting there were no Iranian officials left alive with the authority to formally accept terms. Nobody knows who the leader is, he reportedly said, so there is no one to announce the surrender, but they have surrendered. At the exact same moment, Iran's president, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, General Ahmad Reza Radan, and Ali Larijani, head of the National Security Council, were standing in Tehran's Central Square for Quds Day, the national commemoration, marching publicly on live camera. They were not hiding, they were not cowering, they were criticizing Washington and praising Iranian unity in front of international press. The G7 leaders had the same footage. They had the same reporting. The gap between what the American president described and what the world was watching in real time was not a gap of intelligence lag. It was not a gap of interpretation. It was a chasm. Punchline: when your closest allies stop believing your briefings, you have not merely lost a battle. You have lost the architecture of persuasion that alliances are built on, and that architecture does not rebuild quickly. The realignment already underway. France and Italy, both NATO members, both with troops stationed in Iraq in support of U.S.-led operations, have opened direct diplomatic talks with Iran. Their stated goal, reported by the Financial Times, to negotiate safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz for their commercial and energy vessels. Italy's defense minister said publicly that Europe must speak with a single voice directly to Tehran, not through Washington. India's Prime Minister Modi is in direct contact with Iranian officials on an oil supply agreement. Turkey has already secured permission from Iranian authorities for a Turkish-owned vessel to transit the strait after docking at an Iranian port. Meanwhile, Italy has begun withdrawing its remaining troops from Iraq. One French soldier was killed at a joint base in Erbil. 6 more were seriously injured. Washington was not in the room for any of these conversations. That absence is not a coincidence. It is a verdict. Iran's third path, indispensable, not cornered. Most governments under military pressure either capitulate or escalate. Iran has chosen a third path, to make itself the indispensable negotiating partner for every country that needs energy to flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Their message to Arab diplomats, reported by the Wall Street Journal, is precise: any deal must guarantee safety for all parties, or there will be safety for none. While Iran conducts simultaneous bilateral diplomacy with India, Turkey, France, and Italy, the U.S. Secretary of Defense held a Pentagon press conference where he complained about CNN's headlines, called for a billionaire aligned with the administration to take over the network, and insisted the Strait of Hormuz was functionally open while ships were being struck by projectiles in the same body of water he was describing. You do not win a geopolitical contest by controlling the press conference. You win it by being the party that other nations need. Manage de-escalation. Financial markets, energy companies, and G7 institutional pressure force a diplomatic off-ramp. A face-saving framework through Oman or Qatar allows both sides partial victory. Bombing pauses. The strait reopens on negotiated terms. But Europe's direct Tehran channel, India's oil agreements, Turkey's port arrangements, these remain. The architecture has already been altered even in the most optimistic outcome. Broader realignment. Other middle power nations watching France and Italy decide the same logic applies to them. A parallel diplomatic network emerges, routing around Washington for energy, trade, and regional security. The U.S. remains the world's largest military power, but loses its role as the indispensable mediator. The center holds, but it is no longer the only center. Escalation, the one nobody names out loud. Washington interprets European outreach to Tehran as betrayal and applies economic pressure on its own allies. The war expands into new theaters. Another major asset goes down in a way that cannot be attributed to non-combat causes. The fractures become breaks. NATO, already strained, faces an institutional crisis it was not designed to survive. Energy prices spike to levels triggering political upheaval across multiple democracies simultaneously. The lesson already learned, regardless of how the next week unfolds, the lesson has already been internalized in every European capital. In New Delhi, in Ankara, the United States under this administration does not consult before acting, does not honor traditional coalition structures, and describes battlefield reality in terms that bear no relationship to what allied intelligence services are observing independently. You do not unlearn that lesson, you build around it. 6 Americans died in western Iraq on March 12th. Their sacrifice deserves more than a press conference where a defense secretary complains about newspaper headlines. It deserves the sober, honest accounting of whether the objectives that sent them there are coherent, achievable, and lawfully authorized by every available measure. That accounting has not yet been made.